Hello, everybody. It's Regan here, and today's show is going to be incredibly enlightening and insightful, and I'm super excited to present our speaker. But before we jump in, how many of you were on the hack last night? Last night, we talked about some very interesting things. We talked about mitochondria in the heart, and this is our series of let's make the next decade your best decade when it comes to your health and your life. And I talked about some insights on what causes mitochondria in your cardiac cells to diminish. And we talked about four major factors. And so pop quiz, what were they for those of you who heard it last night? And then the big challenge was we learned that the mitochondria in our heart actually, they need a little bit of demand. So the more energetic demand that we put on our heart, the more mitochondria that our heart produces. And if you're sedentary, then you're going to lose mitochondria even faster, and your heart's going to wither, and you're going to die an early death. And so, so really, it was kind of the old adage of if you don't use it, you lose it. And we talked about the heart muscle as being one of those we don't talk about. We talk about biceps and quads and all the muscles that we can see externally, but your heart is one of the most important muscles that you want to keep healthy. So if you missed the hack, go listen to it in Kajabi. It's all there for you. Really appreciate all that you guys do in our community. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce our guest today. This guest, he is a member of our community, a good friend of mine. I met Dave in Strategic Coach, and Dave Biddle is here today. We're going to be talking about living life, is different when you are expected to die. And I know this is kind of an interesting thing, and we haven't talked about it before, but Dave was diagnosed with cystic fibrosis at the age of 3, and that changed everything that he did in his life. And Dave, not only has he, exceeded expectations of many things, not just, from the fact of surviving, but Dave is someone who thrives. He's got an impressive financial management firm that, he can introduce, but he's also a great father, someone who's incredibly active. But Dave, it's so good to have you on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited for this.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about, the cystic fibrosis. In the early 70s, how much was known about it when you were diagnosed?
Well, not much. In the early 70s and still continuing now, it's the #1 genetic killer of children. So in the 1970s, it was kind of the Wild West, to be honest with you. It was pretty tough. Life expectancy was in your teens. You probably weren't going to get to age 20 based on the data. And that's what kind of formatted everything for me. They didn't have the gene mapped. They didn't have a lot of things that were other than, I'll call them symptom treatments. We got pumped full a lot of tobramycin and gentamicin and really heavy duty antibiotics via IV when we got sick. But I remember I was a kid. I was probably around 11 years old, where they came out with different enzymes that you didn't have to chew, digestive enzymes that you didn't have to chew. The bad thing about chewing them is they also digest your mouth. So it's actually a pretty painful process. I was lucky enough to meet the gentleman who helped pioneer that medication and got it through FDA approval.
Oh,
So
you got to be
it's a
kidding
lot
me.
different. Yeah, I did. He was actually my son's girlfriend's grandfather, and we were at a graduation party for her. And I just asked him what he did before he retired. He said, well, I worked for a drug company. And I said, oh, well, what did you do? And he said, well, we created these enzyme things. And I said, enzyme things? What are you talking about? And he said, yeah, it's these pancreatic enzyme kind of things. And I just smiled, and I stood up, and I reached in my pocket, and I pulled out some pancreas, and I said, these? And he just went white. He's like, what? He's like, where'd you get that? What's going on? Do you have pancreatitis? I said, no, I don't have pancreatitis. He said, you're a CF patient? I said, yeah. And he's like, oh my gosh, this is incredible. And I said, thank you so much for all the work you put into this drug, because it significantly improved our lives. And you don't realize how much benefit was distributed to our community for that. And so then he went into a lot of details about how the FDA didn't like it. They weren't going to approve it because it was basically self-dosing by the patient based on what you were eating and how much fat you were eating. And they did not like that. Like, they want like certain milligrams BID, and that's the only way that we'll do it. So they had to get over that hurdle. It was an interesting story, and it was really neat to meet that guy, just
Wow.
randomly.
Well, imagine it was just as exciting for him as it was for you, because I mean, how many patients did he actually meet who were like randomly pull out this great medication that changed their life? That's
Yeah,
interesting.
it was a great step. So there's a lot of things now. There's some crazy things that we did back in the 70s too, which weren't necessarily helpful. But I mean, a tablespoon of corn oil a day really doesn't help if you have digestive insufficiency. But
Wait, so slow down on that one, because that
sure.
when we were talking about that in our last meeting together, a tablespoon of corn oil.
Oh yeah, I can still taste it today. Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
tell me what the thinking was around that. What was the rationale?
Well, one of the things that's interesting about the early CF stuff is that they really didn't know how to treat us other than in acute exacerbations with high level antibiotics. So most of us in the population had different protocols. So they were basically testing things and trying to find things that would work. Um, I don't exactly know what the theory was behind that. I've tried to think about that, and you're probably smarter about that than I am. But I really don't know. I don't know whether they had started to see things like digestive blockages or something, and they were trying to be proactive against that. But I don't know. But as soon as I could not do it, I didn't drink it anymore.
Man, I honestly, there's no explanation in my mind except corn in the 70s and 80s was like, that was the crop, and we
Yeah.
high fructose corn syrup. And so it was, I have no idea. It's kind of an interesting segue. So how long were you doing that?
I would say, I'm going to guess maybe a year, 2 years, something like that.
Wow. Glad to be done with that. So tell me about the life change, because I don't think I've never dealt with basically you have this death sentence of a diagnosis at age 3. Life is very short for most cystic fibrosis patients. I've met a couple who've been able to live into their 40s, 50s, and it's been phenomenal. But you're one of those who actually has not only has your health, you've maintained it throughout these years, but your health is actually getting better. And we have evidence to prove that with your blood labs, which has been impressive. But what was it like as a kid growing up with basically a diagnosis that, hey, you're going to have a very short life, Dave?
It totally changes how you think, and it totally changes how you interface with the world. So if you're not expected to live past 15, what's the point of education? Right? I'm not going to get a driver's license. Probably not going to get married. I'm never going to college. I mean, all those things just get erased from your future. So, that's really the big change. I'll say the subtle but impactful change, right? I went through a lot of cycles in grade schools. I mean, I was, before my surgery in 79, I missed 2.5 years of school from first grade to fourth grade. So I was in the hospital. So I would leave my school and friends and everybody, and I would spend 10 days in the hospital, and then I'd come back. So I would kind of pop in and out of, my social world. And luckily for me, that social world was fantastic. They greeted me immediately. It was like I never left. Any of my friends don't even remember I did any of that. So
Wow.
it was kind of immaterial to them, which was super valuable to me, and it was very thankful because I would, I'd have to come back and they would instantly bring me back into their fold, and it was like I never left.
Mm.
But it was the expectation difference. If you're expected not to make it through, everything in the world changes, and things get rearranged. Days that are fun are very, very valuable, and you really enjoy them. But I also knew the statistics as well. I mean, we would go to the CF clinic, and there'd be, I remember when I was a little kid, it was full of kids. A couple of
Yeah.
years later, not so many kids. A few more
Mm.
years, not so many kids. So you figure out pretty early that people aren't showing up anymore for a reason. So it really changes how you think and how you interface with the world. And then the world's expectations for you kind of fly out the window.
Yeah, I could imagine, because they're like, well, hey, let's enjoy Dave while he's here. I would imagine that's it. And I guess staying present and appreciating those good days, they're 10 times more valuable when you're like, hey, I'm going to live to be a teenager instead of living in my 80s.
I remember a quick story when I was in high school. And that was right about the time that they figured out the gene, and they mapped everything out and all that kind of stuff. And they had brought ciprofloxacin online, and that was a little bit of a help. But, it was very difficult for me to go to school because that regular get up early in the morning, work all day, go to school, try to do sports would just wear me down. So every few weeks, I'd have to take a couple of days off and just recover, whether I was sick or almost sick or something like this. And I remember in high school, it was a Friday night. I had been out of school probably that Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, feeling horrible. And there was a basketball game that night. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to the basketball game. So I went to the basketball game, and it was important to me because I've been totally alone. Nobody's around me. I just wanted to do something fun to make myself feel better.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a teacher there that started giving me a hard time. And he said, you can't come to the basketball game. I was like, why not? And he said, well, you haven't been in school. I go, well, that's because I was sick. And he's like, well, you can't come in here. And I go, what do you mean I can come in here? Like, this is A, it's a public event. B, I'm a student here, and C, I'm like, I need to come to this. And he's like, no, you can't, you weren't here. I go, I haven't seen anybody all week, and I felt like hell, and I probably have a fever of about 102 right now. So I'm coming in. And eventually he moved out of the way. But, you get into these kind of friction items about that kind of thing. So my view of how to interface with the world is different than maybe the rules for other people. And that's when I really realized that I had to really control my environment. I had to be fundamentally able to modify my schedule and adapt and create time for healthcare if I was going to be able to live longer.
Man, and you've done that into your adult life too. Like you know what your body needs, you know what it doesn't need, you know what works, you know it doesn't work. Even the first time you and I met, you're like, yeah, I need to be on a 3,500 calorie diet. This is the only way that I can make it through. But would you say that was one of the differences? You took ownership over your health at a young age. I mean, how did you make it and other kids didn't? I mean, that's probably a question.
Well, I mean, there is some variance in CF. So there are more severe cases. For example, my brother had a more severe case. So there is some variance there, but there's also some key points in life. So most of the reason that mortality looks so poor is that as young adults, as we enter puberty, that takes a big load on our bodies. Mm-hmm. And during that period of time, that's very typically when people will get severely ill. And we were taught that food is life. So eat anything and anything that has calories and eat as much of it as you possibly can. So weight and calories were the one thing that really kept you going. So when I went through that period of kind of puberty and young teenage zone, I actually lived with my grandmother. And so my grandmother would make me as much food as I could possibly eat. And it was 1950s diet. And it was full of fat and all this other kind of stuff that was great for me. Yes. And so she really helped me, shepherd me through that process. And I think taking the ownership of your health and listening and learning about what your body's telling you on a day-to-day basis, and then adapting what you're doing is a critical skill. And that's really what's kept me going. I think that some psychoneuroimmunology and some other kind of things have really kept me going for that. So I just learned at a really young age, this is what this feels like. And if I do this, I can make it better. And that's kind of my number one thing that I talk about to patients or families, is that you have to learn that skill because it's just critical through life.
Wow. Because you're going into, you speak to groups of patients and their family with cystic fibrosis, and it's something that you're passionate about, which is amazing. And maybe for just a second, you could touch on your relationship with your brother, because his cystic fibrosis, he had a little more aggressive case than yours, it sounds like.
Yeah, he did. So the real history is that my brother was diagnosed first at age 1, And basically, the story goes in my family is that, the doctor came in, told my mom, look, this kid has cystic fibrosis. He's probably not going to live past, you know, 12 or 13 years of age. And she said, well, how do you know that? And he said, well, we did a salt test on his skin, and that's how we figured it out. And the doctor said to her, well, a lot of times what will happen is people will kiss their child and they'll taste salt. And that's one of the ways that a lot of kids way back in the day, before genetics and all that kind of stuff, were diagnosed. Wow. And the way my mom tells it is she sat down in the chair and she looked at the doctor. She goes, well, I have another one just like this at home. So I have two of them. And so that was it. And from that point on, although it's kind of strange, he and I had this kind of inverse relationship. When he was sick, I was healthy. When I was healthy, or the inverse. When I was sick, he was healthy. And we just very rarely, I think it was only once we were ever in the hospital at the same time, which is odd because it's two kids living in the same house with CF, and one of them has pneumonia and the other one doesn't get it. But anyway, it's kind of odd. So he and I grew up together, sharing this experience, sharing this lifestyle, and just kind of talking about medicine, talking about how you feel. Like, hey, my lung doesn't feel right. There's a pain up here. And so we really would engage with the doctors. We would engage with the physical therapists. We would engage with the respiratory people. Why are we doing this? Tell us. We just wanted to learn as much as we could about it. And so through that experience, we had this really special bond because we were really fundamentally going through the same life together. It was odd. I mean, it was different, right? So he got a lot sicker, and he kind of went through some difficulties in high school, and we always would lean on each other for support, and we kind of had this pact together, right? Like, you take care of me, I take care of you. So I remember one day he thought he had a pneumothorax and he called me and said, I'm going to the hospital. I think I have a pneumothorax. This is what I want them to do. And this is what I don't want them to do. Make sure you have that happening. Okay, I got you. So we took care of each other. He got a lot sicker, kind of getting into college age. And in 1993, he needed a lung transplant. He really was going down pretty significantly. And back then, 1992, that was super experimental. I mean, that was the Hail Mary of all Hail Marys, basically, at that point. And ironically, we went in and we met with the surgeons, and they asked Andy, do you have any questions? And he said, I only have one condition and I'll do it. If you guys grant me this condition, I'll do it. And he said, my brother has exact access, just like a doctor, to do anything a doctor wants to do. If he wants to look at a test, he wants to request something, you do what he says. And the surgeons all said, absolutely, we totally get it 100% of the time. And, you build up a relationship when you work with a medical team for decades. Right. So they knew what was going on. They knew how it was. And so I kind of jumped into that position of kind of being the support person who was in control of it. His lung transplant went well. It was super experimental. He had a lot of complications. He ticked off all of them and maybe made some up. This is the kid who was really, really tough. I mean, he was starting to go into liver failure. And they said, we got to do something. He said, don't worry about it. I'll come back in a week. I'll drink a lot of salt water. It'll be fine. He comes back and his numbers are back to normal. But he would do all kinds of crazy things that you would probably like. But as he got there towards the end, he did pass in 2007. And it was really difficult because I was the one that had to make that call to remove life support. He and I agreed to each other that we would have that responsibility. But, you go 35 years working with somebody and taking care of somebody and making these decisions and working with them. It's so hard to call the end. And as I tell people in speeches or talks, it's still a decision that I know in my head was the right thing to do at the time. But in my heart, I just constantly get haunted with it. Did I do the right thing? Did I meet my goal? Did I meet the level that he would have wanted? And we gave him a lot of shots to recover. But ultimately, it was a post-transplant lymphatic problem that he had. So it was kind of almost like a cancer response in the lymph nodes. And it just enveloped his lungs, and that was really nothing we could do.
Man, that must have been, so he was 35 when he passed.
Yeah, he was 35, exactly.
Oh, man, that's, and so who is your wife? Is she taking over his role with you? Because I'd imagine that left a big void.
Yeah, it still leaves a void today. I mean, I still miss him today. I still half the time pick up my cell phone to call him because I saw a cool car driving by or something, So I still have that reflex, but my wife is fantastic. I mean, his transplant was 2 months before we got married. And all he cared about was getting to our wedding. And so he was my best man at the wedding. He gave a toast. It was great. Got a paralyzed vocal cord because he failed a couple times coming off the ventilator. So he kind of was really scraggly like this when he talked. And, but he did a great job. And my wife's been incredibly supportive. I mean, she's so great. She'll tell anybody anytime that, yeah, he's got some health problems, but I'd rather spend a short amount of period with him than not be with him. And so she really helps me out a lot. And she does kind of the similar things that Andy will do. Like she'll smack me on the side of the head and be like, hey, look, I know you're not feeling well. Just take the day off. Okay, I'll do it. So she's really helpful with that. And she's great with kind of supporting all that.
Man, yeah, that's amazing. I can't imagine having to make that call with your brother. That's incredible. And you had a doctor along the way that was pretty transformative for you. I mean, you had this belief and you still have this belief that you can fix the problem, and you have a different expectation of your health. And I think most people with CF or with any kind of diagnosis that's terminal, you have a different expectation of yourself and of what you can accomplish. And so you brought that expectation to a Dr. Oz, and this is not the doctor, not quite Senator
As
Oz.
I call it, it's the real Dr. Oz.
The real Dr. Oz.
That's
Tell us
what
about
I call
the real Dr. Oz. Yeah.
So in 1979, I was very, very ill. So I was 9 years old and I was not going to make it to 10. I mean, I was really, really sick and had been for about a year and a half. So a bunch of doctors got together and they said, we have to do something to try to help this kid. And they came up with two ideas. The first idea was to pump me full of chemotherapy, which I'm very glad they did not do, because that would have been the end of me. And the other idea was that I had a very localized infection in a section of the lung. And they said, what if we just take out the infection? Let's just try to go in and remove it and see what happens. Well, it's good in theory, but you have to find somebody who's willing to do it. And there was a local doctor that I was introduced to. And I still remember the day that I met him, because I was laying in the hospital and this gentleman comes in, he's kind of looking at me. I'm used to doctors coming in all the time and, sit up, breathe, do this kind of thing. But I remember he had this very difficult accent for me to understand. So I had to really focus on him whenever he was speaking and really pay attention to what he was saying. And so he looked at me, he's checking me out, and he said, I think we can fix this. And when he said that to me, I kind of didn't understand what he was saying, because I'm not fixable. Right? At the time, there was no fixing this, but he kept saying, I want to fix this. We can fix this. We're going to get you better and we're going to fix it. And it just changed my paradigm. It changed my paradigm to maybe I can fix this. Yeah. Maybe this isn't just fate is just going to take me down. So, about a week later, he comes in, I see him, I know I'm going in for this surgery. I mean, I'm scared to death. Really scared. He comes in before the surgery, and he says almost the same thing. He says, we're going to take care of this for you. You're going to be okay. I'm going to be here the whole time. We're going to get this fixed for you. And when he said that, it just kind of made me relax, and I just was like, okay, if you've told me twice you can do this, and I knew him as some special doctor that was coming in. So anyway, and he does the surgery. I do wake up. Back in the day, they didn't have all the painkillers that they had now. So I just had Tylenol 3. And it was a pretty rough period for 5 days in the ICU. He saw me just about every day in the ICU. And then he came in, he pulled out my chest tube, did a bunch of other things. I never saw the man again. But I also didn't really ever get sick again.
Really?
So it actually worked.
Wow.
And so through my life, I would always look back and think about, wow, this guy, which was the Dr. Oz on TV's father. So this was Mustafa Oz, not Mehmet. How much do I owe this guy? I mean, he really yanked me out of the jaws of death, and I've never seen him again. He just disappeared. Nothing. And so as I get older and I have kids and I have a business and I get married and I do all these other things, I keep thinking about, wow, this guy really created all this stuff. And so I was driving down, I live in Delaware and they lived in Delaware as well. And I was driving down the road and I saw a car in front of me that's license plate was Oz.
Hmm.
And it was like a lightning bolt hit me. And I thought, that's Dr. Oz. I need to go talk to him. So I immediately hit the gas. I'm cruising down the road. I'm thinking, I probably shouldn't run this guy off the road because it might not be him. But then I kind of got obsessed with the idea of saying thank you to him. And
Yeah.
through a series of people and strategic coach people and all this other stuff, I was actually able to get to the younger Dr. Oz, Mehmet Oz. I met him at a basketball game in Atlanta. And he didn't know he was necessarily going to meet me. And so it turned into this big thing where they filmed it. And on Father's Day, they put this thing out where we were talking to each other. But I was able, now the older Dr. Oz had moved back to Turkey at the time. So that's why he was gone from here.
Okay.
But prior to his death, I was really able to get through younger Dr. Oz a thank you to him to say, hey, this is what you did for me. This is where it ended up. You probably didn't do surgery on many CF kids, so maybe you remember it. But I just want to say thank you. And I think that was one of the most rewarding things in my life. I didn't talk to him, but I knew it got through to him because I got feedback from Dr. Oz and his sisters, and it was just a great moment.
That is amazing, man.
Yeah.
What an experience. So you've looked at, if we transition into your adulthood, like, I mean, even making it to become an adult, that's a feat in and of itself. But how have you been able to build such a successful company and raise kids of your own? And I mean, how have you done that? Because you know that there's, you can have days where you just can't show up as 100% Dave, and it's just, it's just a reality that you've learned to deal with. But how have you been able to do what you've been able to do?
It's a combination of two things. First, it's those fundamental skills. So I listen to my body and I'm able to control my environment. So that's why I'm self-employed, right? I mean, I'm an entrepreneurial person anyway, but being self-employed allowed me to control my schedule. It allowed to control how often I went to doctor's appointments. I could do all those pieces, right? If I need a bigger lunch, I go eat a steak, not a sandwich, right? So I had control of that stuff. I also had control of my health insurance, right? So I buy very expensive health insurance because my health budget is around $600,000 a year with medications and such. So I have to be very careful about that. And I think that fundamentally, that combined with the great improvements that have come out of all the work the CF Foundation has done, including getting all the way into gene therapy and all those kind of things, it was kind of a double barrel approach. So I was able to keep myself healthy as I could and just wait for the treatments to come along. And as they came along, I would incorporate them, and it got better, and then it got better. And that was really the key. So that's probably the way I did it.
I love that. I mean, almost out of necessity, you've had to be entrepreneurial, so you could actually take care of your health, which most people, we don't even realize that. We say, oh, the circumstance is the circumstance, and I'm just, I've got to do my thing. But you've changed that, and you put a lot of emphasis on, changing behaviors, looking at the whole picture. What's some advice you could give other people who, maybe they're not dealing with cystic fibrosis, maybe they are, maybe there's another health challenge that they've got, but what are some things, what are some pieces of wisdom or advice you could give them about changing behaviors?
I think the number one thing that I would say is that medical care is a team approach. And so the patient has to be fundamental in the team. So whether you are perfectly healthy and then all of a sudden you have a problem and you have to go see a doctor, or whether you're dealing with chronic issues or if diabetes or whatever that is, be part of the team. So I talk to a lot of people and they go to the doctor, well, our doctor told me to do this. And I would say to them, well, why? I don't know, my doctor just told me to do that. You have to ask why. Because when you ask why, a couple fundamental things happen. Number one, you build a better connection with the doctor. Number two, the doctor starts to trust you and you start to trust the doctor. And number three, you gain knowledge of why you're doing what you're doing. So for example, if you take a treatment and it's supposed to create this effect, you know what you're looking for. And if it doesn't happen, or it happens too quickly, or it's too severe, you can have a better conversation with your physician. So I just think that concept that it needs to be a team approach is just fundamental. And you and I have worked in that way, and we've talked, all the time. Now, granted, medicine is complex, and it's not everybody's thing, right? It's been kind of my second language over the years. So I wouldn't expect people to be able to jump into a complex scenario and say, oh, this is, I'm questioning this medication or that medication. But having that discussion with your doctor is really, really important. And then also understanding what the limit is of the doctor.
Yeah.
So, there's boundaries that they stop. And I mean, I just met with my CF group yesterday. We had this discussion a little bit that, they deal with very sick people in very acute situations. And they're, in some scenarios are trying to keep people alive for another 2 or 3 years or something. It can be brutal. And I get that. And so understanding where the specialist stops and where other medical practitioners can help you, I think is also something important for long-term success.
And would you give that same advice to parents who have kids who are sick?
Yeah, and you're a perfect example of this. I mean, you're expanding healthcare resources for everybody, and that's kind of what the medicine 3.0 looks like as we go forward. But it's interesting. I did just a quick story. So I was giving a speech, and it was at a pediatric hospital for CF patients, and I think my kids were probably 7 or 8 years old, something like that. So I was a patient and I was a parent. And in the back of the room, there was a woman who, as I kept speaking, became more and more upset. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I'm blowing this. They're going to kick me out of here. I don't want people crying after my talk. That's probably not a successful talk. So I was really, really worried about it. And later I went up and I found her and I kind of said, look, I'm sorry if I upset you. Are you okay? That kind of stuff. And she said, my daughter has CF and I feel so horrible that I did this to her. And so I kind of looked at her and I understood it from a parent perspective. And I said, well, look, let me let you in on a little secret. I don't know what a non-CF person feels like. So this is just normal to me. So nobody did anything to me. Nope, your daughter isn't going to think of it that way because I don't know any different and she doesn't know any different. You're in a great time. You've got great technology. Things are going to be good, and you will get blessings out of this diagnosis. You really will. You learn a lot of great things, and if you can focus on those blessings, it's much more positive versus being kind of a victim and, oh no, this horrible thing happened to me. And those two different paradigms can change your health trajectory significantly.
Massive. Well, and that even with you could look back at your life with resentment and say, oh, the CF took my brother, and it's led me to, I missed half of my life because of, having days where I don't feel great. And but to me, you just seem like a human being that just radiates gratitude and appreciation. But you've got some tenacity, which is really impressive because you look at things differently and you just don't take it at face value, but you actually have shaped the environment around you so that you can thrive and be your best. It's like, Dan Sullivan teaches us about unique ability. It's like you've learned your unique physical capabilities and you've created an environment around you versus like trying to fit into the environment.
And not everything's perfect, right? I mean, I've been kicked out of hospitals, AMA by doctors because I didn't like what they were doing. So you say tenacity, other people might use other words as I was younger about that.
Sure.
And that's fair. But no, I don't think so. I mean, as I'm older and I look back and you're right, there's been a lot of devastation. There's a lot of friends that I know and people I grew up with that they're not here. And but fundamentally, if I look at this as a disease and what it's allowed me to do in my life, there absolutely are blessings with it. I mean, I learned a lot of really adult concepts as a young kid.
Yeah.
Right? I'll give you an example, right? So kids go through high school, they start drinking, they start doing all kinds of crazy things that they shouldn't be doing. I never did any of that stuff. And the reason I didn't is because I'd already been in anaphylactic shock when I was 10. I'm not drinking. I'm not doing anything like that. Are you crazy? I work really hard to stay alive. I'm not going to do something silly like drink a bunch of beers and go try to drive home.
Right.
So, you mature differently and you look at things differently. And those are really good blessings. And the concept of being able to value every day, you know, even if it's just something easy, like, you know, you just go get a gift for somebody, you do something really simple. That's a unique moment that you get to treasure.
Yeah. Because I mean, if you look at all the hardships, I know one of the things that you know, you mentioned we can talk about is your cancer diagnosis in 2013. What was that like when you overcame so much and you're like, all right, I think I've got things figured out, and then whack, you get hit with another diagnosis.
Yeah, it was a pretty good smack. I'll be honest with you. It was good. So I've been having difficulties and other problems, and finally decided, okay, I got to go for this colonoscopy thing, and I went for the colonoscopy, and they weren't really comfortable doing it because I was a CF patient, and they were worried about the pulmonary aspect of anesthesia and everything else. And so I woke up after the procedure, and my wife was sitting next to me, clearly upset. You know, and I have a bit of a fog when I go through that anesthesia, so I don't remember everything. But I remember them showing me the pictures, and they're like, "This is what we found," and I knew exactly what it was when I saw the picture. I'm like, "Oh, I know what that is. That makes sense." Prior to that, no one had ever told me that CF patients have an elevated risk for colon cancer. I'd never heard it anywhere in any literature. Never read it. Nothing.
Man.
So you know, that's a bit of a scary scenario. I hadn't been through that before. I've been pretty healthy for a long time. Reached out to my CF group. They kind of put everything together from a medical perspective, but I was pretty upset for a while. My wife was dramatically upset.
Oh,
And so, but I remember just think one day I woke up and I just said, no, this is not the deal. This is not what's taking me out. It's not going to happen. I refuse. Not happening.
nice.
And I remember going down to breakfast, and she was kind of moping around. I said, look, you know, this is not the way it's going to end. I'm telling you right now, it's not. This is not happening. I will use every ounce to defeat this enemy. And had the surgery. Everything went out. As the surgeon said, it was a chip shot. So it went really well. I've had absolutely no complications whatsoever afterwards, but it was a bit of a gut check. You know, I mean, at that point, it was a family, a business, employees. A lot of people were leaning on me. But I used the same skills that I had my whole life. I mean, I jumped
Yeah.
right into a team-based approach for the doctors, what's going on, asked a lot of questions. I was pretty fit during that period of time. I was pretty healthy.
Yeah.
So that made it a lot easier too. I didn't really have massively compromised lungs going through the surgery.
Man, yeah, it's impressive because the skills you learned early on, I mean, they've just multiplied your future. And so, you know, kind of looking at things from, you know, I like people to kind of capture what you do professionally, because I think there's a lot of value out in the financial department, and a lot of people are looking for financial independence and having an opportunity to kind of grow in that area. But can you just talk a couple minutes about like, you know, you've got this new program you've launched, and maybe what it's like for people to work with you on a professional level now that they've got to know you personally? Because obviously we want to work with someone with tenacity if they're in the financial world, but also people who think differently, because it's such a, you know, it's a vulnerable part of life. You know, our health and our wealth are, you know, they're those things that we
They're important.
yeah, very important. But yeah, if you wouldn't mind, I know we didn't really talk about you sharing it, but I think it'd be interesting.
Yeah, I mean, all these themes just radiate through everything that I do. So very often we'll have people that'll come into my financial company, which is in Wilmington, Delaware, and they'll tell me, I've never had a meeting like this. I've never had this discussion with a financial advisor. And as a general rule, financial advisors tend to be pretty analytical and very numbers based, and that's usually what happens in the meetings. And so because of my kind of Quakerly background, I said, okay, well, my role in life is to really help people. So I just designed a system of financial management that was more around the people than the numbers.
Mm.
So, you know, we developed a lot of technology and studied a lot of positive psychology stuff in order to create this environment where we're more interested in you first, and then your money. And then we want to know what your story is and what your retirement movie looks like. And we'll build the money to that point. So if you called me and said, hey, I want to come in for a meeting, I would tell you, you don't need to bring any financial information for the first meeting at all. I
Nice.
just want to learn
Yeah.
about you. I want to understand what's important to you, what you worry about, what are the dangers, opportunities, and strengths that you possess, and how we go through that. And so I think that's something where I've just tried to radiate and help more and more people through developing different systems. And we manage 401k plans, and we've built this big brand new 401k structure. It's pretty revolutionary. And that's just a matter of expanding the impact of the people that we work with.
I love that. And so if you kind of look at your big plan for the future, you have 2 kids,
I do, yes.
and do you think they'll be in the financial world with you at all when they're?
My older son does work with me currently. So he's graduated college and he works with me now. I don't know if he's going to be a financial advisor per se, but he really enjoys being in the business. He works in the 401k division.
Okay.
And so I think that's good. My younger son, he's in going to school in Nashville as a recording industry engineer. So he's probably pretty far away from the financial side of things. But importantly, though, he's kind of entrepreneurial too. So he's very good at kind of the business stuff. And I grew up with a lot of health issues. They obviously knew about my health issues, but they also grew up in a business owner's household. So, a lot of dinner conversations were about business things and that kind of thing. So they're pretty comfortable with it. But most importantly, they got to find their path. They got to be happy with what they do.
Sure.
And that's great. I'm super lucky that I get to work with my son every day and see him every day. That's a great blessing that a lot of people don't get to do. So I'll take that every day I can, as long as I can.
Yeah, that's amazing. Well, this has been awesome. And is there anything that you'd like to share that we haven't talked about today, Dave, or anything I should have asked you that I didn't?
Oh, sorry. I got to get rid of that. Sorry, you cut out a bit there. Sorry, I apologize. Give me that question again. Sorry.
Anything that I should have asked you today that I didn't, or anything that else you'd like to share?
No, I mean, I would say, from my perspective, what you've helped me do has been dramatically helpful, because I set a goal to live to age 100, which I think will make me the longest living CF patient in human history.
Yeah.
And that's a big goal, right? But the problem is step 2 of the goal. And that is, what do you do next? And so it's been interesting. Even though I have a lot of experience with medicine, I didn't really know where to go outside of the traditional services. And so how do I become healthier? How do I change this perspective? If this is going to go 47 years down the road to my goal, I better start doing some things that are more long-term. And so I think that's where you and I really kind of, got together and really create a lot of stuff. So I'm very thankful for your help in this functional medicine world to try to figure it out. Because when you first look at it, it's pretty big and pretty scary. You can listen to a bunch of podcasts and that's great. But if you want to actually do something, who do you do it with? How do you figure it out? Who's the right person? What's the right procedure? Does it make sense? That kind of stuff. And so that would be one thing. So just to thank you for all the help that you've given me.
I'm honored. Yeah, my pleasure.
And I think also ultimately, I think as kind of at the end, it's what you think about inside your brain is what happens.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of bad diseases out there. There's a lot of bad things that happen to families.
Yeah.
And that's kind of nothing we can do about that. But you can change how you think about it. And I think that's really a fundamental piece. And earlier I mentioned psychoneuroimmunology. It's real.
Yeah.
What you think about changes how your body responds to things. And I think that's probably one of the biggest secret weapons. I mean, it's not going to take a CF person from acute problems to healthy, but it may be able to extend that period of time where they're around, or at least during the period of time they're there. The other thing that's interesting about that is, in particular CF patients, is that, and unfortunately, I've been to a lot of services for people.
Oh, yeah.
And there's always kind of a common theme. And the common theme was the person was really unique. The person didn't complain about their situation. They were very positive, and that's how people will remember them. So I'm kind of proud that is a theme that goes through our CF community, but it can be through all communities. So other people that have other issues, a kid with type 1, I mean, all kinds of things could happen. And I think it's just a matter of being proactive about what's going on between your ears and trying to find any little glimpse of blessing in that diagnosis, and focus on that blessing as much as you possibly can, because it makes everything around you and your health better.
I love that. Think about how many people are completely healthy and they spend half their day on Facebook or social media groups complaining about the world or bitching about politics. And then you've got people with cystic fibrosis and they're like, oh yeah, I'll probably die when I'm 17, and they're positive and they're reinforcing each other. And I love that. Such a powerful message. And then psychoneural immunology, there's a book called Molecules of Emotion by Candace Purton. She coined the term, and I know you know who she is, but if you guys haven't read that book, it's about 25 years ago is when she published it, I believe. And it was one of the reasons I got into more natural medicine myself, because of that book. And it's so powerful, but yeah, it helps you understand the power of your thoughts, and your thoughts can heal or they can destroy your physiology pretty quickly. So Dave, this has been awesome. I really appreciate who you are as a human, a leader in the CF world, and somebody who's given us a great opportunity to learn what it's like to live with a diagnosis like that. So I appreciate you opening up to us today. That's been amazing.
Yeah, this is great. Again, we just want to try to help as many people as we can. If it's a little tidbit that helps a family or a friend or somebody, then I've done my job. That's perfect.
Man, I love it. And then if people want to get in touch with you, either on the CF side, or if they want to work with you in your financial firm, what's the best way they can reach you?
The easiest way, so the company is BCM Wealth Management, Bravo Charlie Mary. We're in Wilmington, Delaware. If they want to get a hold of me, zip me an email. It's just dave@bcmwealth.com. I'm happy to help any CF group or informal group or formal group. There's a lot of CF specific stories I can get into as well that would resonate for those populations, or any other group. I mean, I really enjoy doing public speaking. I try to help as many people as we can, and I love to do that work as service to the community.
Love it. Awesome. Well, thanks so much. Thanks again, Dave, and thanks everyone for being on the show today. If you like this, share it with your friends, your family, your loved ones. Leave us a review. Really appreciate you all. Take care, and Dave, we'll talk very soon. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much. Take care, everybody.
Bye-bye.